the universe kept saying, no, this is not for you. And I kept going back to what was safe. Safe was unfulfilling and it didn't light me up. I was good at what I did, but I didn't enjoy it.
Hello and welcome to Founding with Soul, the podcast that sits down with corporate dropouts turned soul-led entrepreneurs that are building businesses that actually feel good. We're redefining success in every episode, and this one is no different. I'm your host, Alana Kane, and I have Kirstyn Rawlings with me today, the founder of Move Your Wellness, and I met her all the way back in 2018. She's one of my traveling soul sisters, and actually, before we were getting on here, I realized that we actually find each other and like collaborate or see each other in times of transition, which is crazy. Because when I met you, I was only 2 months into my solo traveling. I think you were about to leave Mexico City and start a whole new adventure. And then again, I saw you in LA when you were about to go to Costa Rica. And that was right before I broke my ankle and came home. And now you're back home and I'm about to leave. And here we are again talking about it. So I'm really excited to talk more about transition since this is one of the big themes of the podcast. But let me read your bio. Let me introduce you to all listeners and show them why this conversation is going to be so juicy today. So Kirstyn's the founder of Move Your Wellness, and after 20 years of climbing the corporate ladder, she finally left her stressful, unfulfilling career behind and turned her passions into aligned, soul-based business. As a trauma-informed breathwork facilitator, yoga teacher, and lifelong dancer, Kirstyn now offers transformative experiences from powerful breathwork journeys to dynamic movement practices. She also blends her love for travel and adventure by hosting immersive retreats in magical destinations. Her mission is to help people connect with themselves and others, introduce them to unique, life-changing experiences, and feel their absolute best one move at a time. And let me just tell you, I took a breathwork class from her last week, and it was absolutely magical. So, Kirstyn, thank you so much for coming on, and I can't wait to dive into your journey a little bit more.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me on. It is such an honor and a privilege. I love your mission. And ever since we met in Mexico, we were aligned, which is how we become and stayed in touch, become friends over all these years. And yeah, I was thinking about like our journey when I was getting ready for today. And yeah, I'm so proud of everything that you have achieved in that time, the growth and being able to witness it from afar and then interweaving and linking up at different parts. So I'm super excited to be here. Thank you so much for having me on.
You're welcome. Yeah, I mean, I think both of us have had so many twists and turns over the last like 7 years that I really don't know too much about like how you got to where you were. So I'm excited to dig into that and then obviously talk a little bit more about what's been happening lately. Well, okay, you were back in Michigan, which did you ever think you would say that?
No. And, honestly, I'm struggling with it right now because for whatever reason, I've been called back here. I trust the divine path, the divine timing of everything. I always joke and say I'm like a cat. I always land on my feet. So why would this be any different? And so, yeah, I'm just here recalibrating after living in Costa Rica for 3.5 years. And I don't know where I'm going to land. I'm here soft landing, but it's super trippy because I grew up in a small town. And the first chance that I could, I got out of here when I was 18, went to college. So full circle coming back, it's a little weird, but I'm leaning into it and embracing it.
Yeah, and as you know, I have experience doing the same exact thing.
Mm-hmm.
So I know you'll be good. There's so many divine lessons and going back and being with family and kind of seeing where you grew up from a new lens. So
Yeah.
I'm excited to see what comes for you. But let's dive into college. You're probably like me, hometown was like, I'm getting out of here. You went to Minnesota. How was college life? Like, did it open your eyes to a bunch of things? Tell me a little bit more.
Yeah. Well, before I went to college, which I think this is a huge part of what is wrong with our academic system, among many things, is that you start looking at colleges for what you want to study and do in your life when you are a child. When you are 16 and starting to look at where you want to go to school, you don't know who you are. I mean, I'm in my mid-40s and I'm still learning new things that I'm interested in, new hobbies. And so when you're that young and the pressure to figure out what you want to do is it's crippling. And so I loved fashion growing up. I get every single magazine every single month, and I would go through and I could tell you who designed what dress. And I had a passion for fashion. And so when I went to school, I was looking at schools where I could go to a fashion career. And so I got into Minnesota, and my brother, who was 3 years older than me, played football there. And so it was kind of like it was out of state, it was away from my family, but it was like a dotted line. So it was like a soft landing. And so I started in fashion merchandise, or I'm sorry, in design, and I just couldn't hack the sewing. So I found myself in a degree, or on my path of a degree, and I had to change. And so I already had tons of classes that were towards that major, and they were also on the quarter system and was shifting to a semester. And so I had to make another choice and say, okay, well, I'm not going to try to do another year in college when I just finished my first. So I'm going to transition into fashion merchandising. And so I did. But again, you don't really know what you don't know. People think that when you're in the fashion industry, it's just, you go to the market to buy and you're like, oh, this is fabulous. I'll take 10 of these, 20 of these. And it's not. It's a lot of math, which I'm actually very good at. And so, yeah, I finished my degree, and then I graduated the spring after 9/11. And so when I was going to the job market, well, there was no job market. So here I was, college grad, a degree that I'm like, what the heck? And so, yeah, I felt pigeonholed right from the beginning of getting out of college.
Did you like envision the Devil Wears Prada career path for yourself?
Yeah, and honestly, I mean, I landed there, right? So I did land a job in Chicago, and it was crazy. You'll hear more about my crazy story in a bit, but I was fired after 2 weeks, and this woman was the Devil Wears Prada in real life, and she did zero training. I mean, it's literally, she just threw me in the showroom, and I was not set up for success, and I didn't succeed, and I was let go. And so I found myself in a new city with an apartment, no job. And so that's when I had to make a little pivot. But then I ended up getting a job at Neiman Marcus, and I did some years later. I was literally 26 years old, and I was writing buys in Coco Chanel's apartment in Rue Cambon in Paris. So yeah, it was a little bit like that eventually, but it wasn't all roses to get there, for sure.
I mean, that's pretty cool. But yeah, like when you look at your LinkedIn, so like when I first friended you on LinkedIn, I think we had already been connected for a couple years. And then I was like, dang, I know she was successful, but like just the brands that you've worked with, I'm like, Neiman Marcus and Guess and Speedo. I'm like, she was climbing that ladder like very fast and very hard. Tell me like a little bit about your experience in your 20s in corporate, because like you became senior level, like I feel like pretty quickly.
Yeah, I did. And so it started right out of the gate. So when I was at Neiman Marcus, so first and foremost, to get into their esteemed executive development program, you had to go through an extensive interview process. You had to do like a personality inventory that was 2 hours long with questions like, did the sight of dirty fingernails disgust you? And even to do that test, you had to do a timed math test. And so then once you pass all that, then you go for a weekend interview. And I got so deathly sick on that trip down to Dallas, but I got in. You had to do like a group project. Everything was an interview, dinner. So it's just this huge weekend of interview. And then I got in, there was like 22 people in my development class. And then it's like 6 months of learning Neimanisms. Everything was homegrown, all their systems. And I mean, it was a well-oiled machine. At the time, it was like in their 95th year or something like that when I was working there. And so I was already with like the creme de la creme of people that wanted to get into fashion. And as you're in this program, you're rotating through different buying offices to see which is a fit. And everyone, of course, wants either like the French collections or couture, handbags, something like that. And I landed in fashion accessories. And there was 2 offices in the whole company that had a hybrid role of a buyer and a planner. And that was one of the offices. And so, it had a lot more responsibility, but that's what set me up in order to continue my trajectory within the company. So I won Assistant Buyer of the Year. And then because of just having that, like microscope on me, I was the first when I went out to the store to be a manager. It's part of the program. And you go out to be a manager to see what it's like to be in the customer service, because that's what Neiman Marcus is known for, is their customer service. So I was the first manager to go to the Beverly Hills store as a full-on manager. So it was, again, like moving into my second position there. It was another kind of first or something. Really, I was trailblazing my career, and I didn't even really realize it at the time. I was just really eager. Um, and that was the first time where I ran into a lot of difficulty with management, and I really didn't have a supportive boss. Whereas when I was in the earlier stages at Neiman in the buying office, I had incredible bosses. And so this is where I started to see, this is not really what I want to do within my career. And then also being in the store side, it was, a whole different experience. Of course, it was super cool. I was in Beverly Hills, and I mean, the amount of celebrities that you would see or help was like an experience in and of itself. But then when I continued going back to the buying office, which is the next part of the program, I already was kind of like tainted a bit with just, is this really where I want to be? And I did fall in love with Los Angeles. And so I wanted to get back there. So when I went back to Dallas, I knew that it was just a means to an end to get another, move into my next position, which at that point it was a senior merchandise planner. And that's when I was in the French collections, which was with Chanel, Dior, Kirstyn Rawlings. But I was only there for like a year and a half because I wanted to get back to LA. And so that's when I left and I went back to LA, and then I started working for Guess.
I mean, that's like so many people's dreams to be doing Coco Chanel, and you were what, like 26 or 27 at the
Yeah,
time? Like, that's
I was
wild.
28.
Yeah, like so much in so short of a time. Did you have any type of like work-life balance, or it was just work, 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 work?
And and of course it's just different when you're in the buying offices and when you're out in the store. I actually forgot to put this in, but I also, when I was an assistant buyer at Neiman Marcus, and then even when I went back, I I'm self-made. Like I come from very supportive parents, but not a lot of money. And a lot of the people that were in the program, their parents were very affluent. And so I was making, I think I started at like 32,000, which was nothing. I was living a very, very, modest lifestyle, and I was living paycheck to paycheck. Now, to be honest, I would also be like getting Manolo Blahniks, and I was living a little beyond my means in some regard, but I had to work two jobs. So
So you probably a discount, right?
yeah, well, then they had get you with a double discount. And then, yeah, so, but I was working two jobs as well. So that's where I had a work-life balance, but because I had to have a second job, which I loved, and that became like my social circle, but that's where I didn't have so much of a balance, but it was because I was working a second job.
Yeah, and I mean, even today, almost like all of my friends have some kind of side hustle, even in
Mhm.
their full corporate careers. So I feel like that's something a lot of us can relate to. As you're going through corporate, I know you take a little travel sabbatical at some time. So tell me, like, leading up to that, what was going on, and maybe what kind of made you realize that you needed a break?
Yeah. Well, I continued having multiple jobs when I went into my 30s because I was a pole dancer as well. So with that, I was teaching, I was traveling around the world, performing, competing. And so, even though I had these like director level positions, I also had something else on the side that was a job. It allowed me to start to travel. And I had never really done travel up until my mid 30s because my brothers were both married, and for our family to get together, it just made more sense for one person, which was myself, to fly instead of their families to go and meet wherever. So it got to a point where I hadn't really gone and done any travel, and I really deeply desired it. So I said to my family, I said, look, I love you guys, but I love me more, and I'm going to start traveling. So that's what I did. And my first big trip was to Australia when I went to perform for Maya, the R&B singer. I was like a backup dancer. But it was at that time that I met a man, and he was from Brazil and lived in Australia and was like living this dream. And up until then, I didn't really know any other way of living. I kind of subscribed to this American dream, and I saw a whole different way of living. So through him, we ended up doing long distance dating. The company I was working for at the time, we did have unlimited PTO. So I worked my butt off, but then I also worked my butt off in order to go and take more holidays across the world in Australia. So we went to Bali one time. Bali is like Australia's Hawaii to US. And he had been there, I don't know, like 25 times or something. And he knew all these people in Uluwatu. And I just sat in awe of all these people I was meeting. They had life figured out, in my opinion. They were all different types of backgrounds. Some were doctors, marketers, lawyers, and they would work for 3 to 4 months out of the year. And then they would go and they would live somewhere for the rest of the year in some place like a Bali or in India or Thailand. And these people were the most kind, down to earth, smart, worldly people. And I was like, that is what I want. And so that job that I was at eventually ended. And that is when I went on my first solo trip for 6 months. And because I've had the word planner in my job title, the theme of the trip was I'm planning not to plan. And it was an exercise in spontaneity for me. And so I had a loose itinerary, but I booked as I traveled. So it left some room for, people to recommend something. But that was my first big kind of trip. But, even to get to that trip, like I totally manifested it. A couple, or not even a couple years, like a year before I left that company, I literally had said to multiple people, I said, I just want to somehow come into some money that I can go and I can travel. I just don't want to work. I want to travel. And that's exactly what ended up happening for me. And so I went on my big trip. And then when I came back, I wanted to have my next job to be an international job. And so ultimately that's where I landed, but that's a crazy story in and of itself too.
Yeah, I think travel, everyone needs to do it. And if you haven't, this is your sign because it really does open your eyes to so many things. I had kind of a similar situation where I never even thought it was a possibility that I could live that way. And then, yeah, I met just like the most amazing people and was like, okay,
Mhm.
I'm doing it. Like, I don't know how I'm
Yeah.
going to make it happen, but I did.
Did you now? And you're getting ready to go and do another. And also look at the people that you have in your world. A lot of your friends are people that you met in your travels and you are still friends with to this day. I mean, travel is really the best education that you can give yourself, and meeting people. You just are constantly meeting people that are inspirational. Their stories are phenomenal, and you truly meet friends of a lifetime.
Yeah, like we spent 2 days together, 3 days together, and like 7 years later, here we are. So
Yeah.
I feel like it's just when you're on kind of that same vibe of how you want to live, you just meet the people that stay, and it can only take a day, and you're like, okay, you're my bestie now.
Yeah.
We're soul sisters. So getting ready for that trip, you said like, okay, your first one, you had a job, and then were you just kind of saving for going on the trip or like financially, what did that kind of look like? Because that's like a big stopper of a lot of people.
Yeah. So I was very, very fortunate. The company that I was working for was acquired and my position was transitioning. And so with that realignment, I got a severance package, and that's what allowed me to go. But, not only that job, but I mean, how I landed even to where I just was in Costa Rica, and how I landed on getting to my career is I had 5 different jobs. And for me, through acquisition, through merger, through COVID, through layoffs, and the universe kept saying, no, this is not for you. And I kept going back to what was safe. Safe was unfulfilling, and it didn't light me up. I was good at what I did, but I didn't enjoy it. And so, when I look back and I just woulda, coulda, shoulda, I wanted to take a step into something that was more aligned and into my passion, but Yeah, I was crippled by fear. And it's true what they say, everything that you want is on the other side of fear. So, I landed there eventually. And again, back to that divine timing. But yeah, I had constant pivots and constant redirection from the universe. And I just didn't listen.
Yeah. So when you set out on that trip, it was just kind of like an eat, pray, love situation. Did you have any like fears holding you back of even going, or you just kind of said, F it, I'm doing this and we're going for it?
No, I was super stoked. And I think that's a big thing too. And I'm sure you hear this all the time when you're traveling, is there is so much fear out there, especially as women. And so when you're going to go and do your travels, people saying like, oh my gosh, aren't you scared? Or there are so many people that want to travel, but they are scared themselves. I've met so many people that really, really want to travel and they can't find someone to travel because they don't have the time, the money, the resources, whatever. And so they don't end up traveling, but they really want to. And then when they finally step into doing their first solo travel, they're like, oh my God, this is amazing. And what I found in my travels is that you're never solo. Like everyone always wants to know your story, whether you stay at hostels, whether you stay at hotels, constantly going to be meeting people. And there was times where I would literally have to schedule time to say like, no, I'm not going to do a social activity tonight. I need to just like come back to my center. I need to plan where my next travels are because there was just always people around. And of course, you fall into the coolest experiences. And I can't tell you how many times I ended up at like some local's house for dinner. And, I never felt unsafe. But some of the things that I did in my travels have been super questionable. Risk, high reward.
Right. And you meet like all these people doing the craziest things for work, or like you said, like taking 4 months off and then working 4 months and then continuing the cycle. And like people around you in like the small town, you just never hear of that. And then you finally like have, your horizons broaden, especially today, you can work online and do so many things. So
Yeah.
really cool seeing other people doing, the traveling, but then also like learning their whole story as well.
Hmm.
And yes, I have thought about a lot of my side quests, I guess you call them. And yeah, I don't tell my mom those things.
I know.
She does not
Yeah.
know. Okay, so you go on your trip. What happens when you come home?
Yeah. So I really wanted to live and work internationally. And so I ended up finding, well, it didn't happen overnight, but a recruiter ended up reaching out to me from Mexico City. So I was going through this rigorous interview process, and then there was a huge earthquake in Mexico City, and then it just went radio silence from the company, of course. But I had to move on with my life. And so I ended up taking another job and it was in Detroit, so back in my home state, and it was an amazing opportunity. I kid you not, I can't make this shit up. It's crazy. So I had arranged all of my stuff. I had a storage unit in LA because I put all my stuff in storage before I went travel. And so I had flown back to LA to do the move. I had the movers lined up and everything. I kid you not, I landed and I turned on my phone and I had tons of messages from this Mexico recruiter out of after like months of not hearing anything. And so I'll never forget, I'm listening to her voice messages as I'm deplaning. And then I'm at the car rental place. And I remember having a conversation with her. And she's like, well, we're ready to make an offer. And I said, I'm literally in LA right now. And I've got movers coming in 2 days to move my stuff for this other job. She goes, please, 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 will you please hear us out? And so I told her, I said, look, if you're serious about this, you need to have a contract to me in 24 hours. And they did. And then I said, okay, I literally need to come down and have a face to face with the CEO and we need to hardline this contract. And so I did. I literally did a 24-hour turnaround. And so I took a flight, landed, went to the office, went through line by line on the contract, and I took the job. And I took the job against my better judgment. I knew it was not the right thing, but I did it anyway because it more aligned with my desire to live and work internationally. But I knew the job was going to be very, very, very tricky, and it was. So I called the job in Detroit and I apologize. I couldn't even believe I was so nervous making that call. So I'm a woman of my word. And I just felt horrible. And so I literally changed my movers from Detroit to Mexico City and off I went. And so it was for a pet company because the previous job that I was in was a pet industry, and I was the first hire outside of the family nucleus and really was an integral part of developing and growing that company. And it was in the natural sector, which at that time was really, really, that ages me a lot. That was really like an up and coming thing. So it was a family owned Mexican company, traditional pet store, culturally very, very different. They had over 300 locations all throughout Mexico. And there was a private equity firm behind the family fund, and it was basically they were forced to hire someone like me to revamp their image. And so here it's like, here is this American woman coming into a foreign country, into this family company, and I was like the pawn between the chess games of the family and the PE firm. And I mean, that's how I got one of my dogs. So they used to import dogs, and it was just like, oh my God, there was just so many crazy things that happened. And they used to sell in over 100 locations, dogs, like live animals. But they, again, even though there were veterinarians in each store, there was dogs that were constantly dying, getting sick. And it was just, it was crazy. So I started to make these changes, and I was just up against so many challenges. And so it got to a point where they rehired back. She was literally, she had to be let go. But she was, I think, like the aunt, or I forget, sister or something. This Okay, this woman was crazy. I hope no one ever watches this, but she was crazy. You would be When she came in to back to the office, I knew Spanish decently. I had a translator full time, and I had a Spanish teacher that would come to my office. And I remember sitting in the boardroom, and she comes in and she's talking in Spanish, pacing up and down, screaming all in Spanish and saying, I don't care if she doesn't speak Spanish, that's her problem. And saying like all the bonuses are gone, and just like crazy. And so I was like up to my neck and above. They fired the CEO that hired me. And ultimately, it came down to I ended up stop working in the office because it became so hostile. They stopped paying me, a single woman living in a foreign country. And so the PE firm had to sweep in and be like, no. And so it got to a point where I was like, you guys, this is not working. Like, you've completely pivoted. You're turning against what you desire. You wanted to revamp the image, and you're not setting me up for success. We are not aligning. And so ultimately, once again, I kind of fell into a severance package because it was just not amicable. And so then I found myself in another country. They did a huge project to put them into a position where they could go and fund some changes without me as the pawn. And then that's when we met. Shortly after that, I was on hiatus from that crazy job. And then I was again like recalibrating, like, oh my God, what am I gonna do? Like, this is insane. Like, you can't make this stuff up. But it happened. So
I'm gonna start calling you Queen of Severance.
it's written in the stars, actually, with my astrology about inheritance and lotto and all these things. So I mean, it's not coming with a price, let me tell you that. I mean,
You
my
worked hard for it.
sanity and just, yeah, it was wild. But that's why now I'm so much into nervous system regulation because, girl, I went through it.
Yeah, so we met, and I remember like you telling me how crazy it was, and I stayed with you in Mexico City. You had this like very cool apartment, like Miami Vice style, and like the nicest
No.
neighborhood. And I was like, man, she's so awesome. Like, how do you get this? You know, it was just amazing. But then, okay, so this is kind of where your story transitions to the health and wellness sector, because not long after you went to get your yoga teacher training, and I had already gotten mine, and I know you were asking me some questions. So talk a
Mhm.
little bit about like, did like traveling kind of spark your idea of wanting to do that, or what kind of happened to want to book a trip to India and go get your yoga teacher
Yeah.
training?
Well, again, I just found myself in transition, and I had the time, I had the resources. And I don't even know where it came from. Literally out of the blue one day, it just downloaded to me. And It wasn't even on my radar. At the time, I wasn't even practicing yoga. I'd been a lifelong dancer. And so one day I was just like, I'm going to go to India and get my yoga cert. And that's what I did. And then when I was deciding where to go, I'm a tropical beach girly just like you. And so it was like a no-brainer to go to Goa. And so, yeah, I went and I did my yoga certification. Again, just so on time, so on purpose. I was there with 9 other women from no 2 women were from the same place. We had a huge age range but even our instructors, the teachers, I mean, still to this day, we keep in touch and they're just like, we can't even describe the energy and the connection that you women had. It was so incredibly powerful. And we all landed there in the exact program in the exact place as we needed to be. So that was a really, really beautiful experience. And I love India. I cannot wait to get back. I only was in Goa and then I spent some time in Mumbai after solo. I have some crazy stories with that. I ended up like on the male only train and I'm just like, you know? But yeah, so then when I came back from that and I went to Sri Lanka afterwards. I know that's a place near and dear for you. And then I came back. And so let me back up. When I was still in Mexico City, I again didn't know what in the heck I was going to do. So one of my amazing women friends from childhood, we started dancing at 3 here doing ballet. And she is another incredible woman. And so she works with this experiential learner coach. And I was like, all right, if she is working with this coach, then this woman must be like super badass. And so I ended up doing some sessions with her. And, I think like when you don't know something, you don't know. We all have different ways that we navigate life, different tools in our toolkit, as I call it. And so I wanted to learn something new. So through different experiences that she creates for you, I learned how to better navigate things. And I also learned what my true passion was. So through some exercises, it all came back to movement and dance and helping people. And so that's really, how I kind of parlayed into the yoga as well. And then through her, I ended up going to live in Florida at one of her clients' friends' houses. And that was wild in and of itself. So here I go back to the States to get stateside. I put my stuff in storage in Mexico City, which was super scary. And I go to Florida and with my 2 dogs in tow, and I go and rent this room from this man that I've never met. And so I was in Florida recalibrating, but I had just coming off of my yoga. So I was doing yoga every single day and I was looking for jobs in the wellness space, but then I started to panic and I started to get desperate. And then that is when it just took everything in me to redo my resume, hire a resume writer, because I mean, just even the thought of redoing my resume or interviewing, I just like every piece of my body was rejecting it, but I felt like I had to. I depleted my funds. I was just getting really scared. So I ultimately ended up getting a job, and it was in a dental supply company and it was in Sacramento. So I ended up taking that role. And so I landed, yeah, and going back into a position that I did not want to do, but it was a means to an end. And, also the most money I had ever been making. It was another director role, like all these things, more online. So I needed to get more online experience. And well, I started there in November, at the end of November, and February, COVID happened. And I was working for a dental supply company. So I'll never forget. I mean, literally one night we were trying to get some KN95s and the Italian government came in and took my supply. So it was, the dentistry industry during COVID just went totally belly up. And I found myself in another situation where we were acquired by one of the largest suppliers, and my job was eliminated again. And once again, I received a lovely severance. Again, going to recalibrate my life, and I was going to go down to Mexico, and again, I was going to try to do something in the wellness space. So a few years back, I had done my very first breathwork experience in Mexico City. And it wasn't when I was living in Mexico City, because I was there And again, with the pole connection, I have some really good friends that had pole studios, and I was there teaching and doing a competition. So there was this intuitive that all of my friends had gone to over the years, and they called her La Datora. And all of my friends that went did a past life regression. And I had been trying to link up with her, and our schedules never aligned. So one day my friend was like, oh my God, Kirstyn, La Datora's in town. I was like, oh my God, let's go. So we went, and I just thought I was going to end up doing a past life regression, but after a brief conversation, and at that time I wasn't speaking Spanish, or I was, but not very great. And so we start doing breath work. I didn't know what the heck breath work was. And after about 15 minutes, the things that I was feeling in my body, the things that I was seeing, the way that she was conducting the session, the questions she was asking and my responses and where I was feeling the pings and pains in my body, it just blew my mind. And when I came out of that session, I was just like, what just happened? And I knew from that moment on that I was going to do something with breath work. So fast forward to when I left the dental company, I was going to go into my breathwork facilitation training. And I had, even though I had that experience with breathwork, it was something I was really nervous about doing on my own, because I just felt like all this activation, and I just don't know if I did it on my own. Like, I was kind of afraid of my own power or what I might discover. And so I got an email when I was in this transition, when I was going to be going to Mexico, and it was to do a free breathwork online with the program that I ultimately ended up doing. And so I was like, yes, I need breathwork right now. And so at the end of the call, they are launching their next cohort. And so I did a call with one of the girls, and I was this close to signing up. And then I had no business being on LinkedIn. Truly, I don't even know why I was on there. And then I saw he wasn't my boss, but he worked in a peripheral department at Guess. And I saw that he was working at this place, and I was like, oh, interesting. I thought he was working at this other place. And I saw he had posted a position that was like essentially what I do. And I was like, oh, interesting. Click, submitted my resume. I was going to Mexico, and I was going to do my breath work. Well, I got the position. So instead of going to Mexico, I ended up taking yet another role. And I was like, okay, well, I'll just do the breath work another time. And so that was my last corporate job. And then I was laid off from that about 2.5 years ago. And during that time, so I was hired during COVID, and the company was fully remote. And so at that time, I had met somebody, and he lived in Costa Rica. And so we went on one date, and then I was like, you had some women coming in town, and he does like some tourism and things like that. And he mentioned on our date, he's like, oh, I haven't booked the yoga teacher for this women group I have coming. And I was like, oh, put that in my back pocket. So then he left, and a couple days later, I just sent him a message like, hey, how serious were you about that yoga position? And then he replied with screenshots with hearts and stuff. And so I was like, screw it. Why not? High risk, high reward. So I went to my boss, and I said, hey, can I go to Costa Rica for a couple weeks? I'll work remote 1 week, and then take a week off. He's like, yeah, sure. I don't care. So I went, and then that's when I started the long distance dating. And then it got to a point in that relationship where it was like, all right, it's either nice to have met you, or let's see where this can go. So since he had a job rooted in tourism, and I was working remote, it just made more sense for me to go and ask. And plus, I love working internationally. That's my jam. And so in February, so that was in November when I met them. Come February, I asked if I could move, and I got like 3 minutes into my spiel, and my boss was like, done. When are you moving? Because he was like, if you're happy, I'm happy. So in May, Memorial Day is when I moved, and that's how I landed in Costa Rica. And then not even a year later, I was laid off. So that's how I found myself living in Costa Rica. And, once again, I was laid off, and I was in some place where I was like, all right, what am I going to do? And this time, like, the strongest visceral reaction ever, I could not go back to corporate. there was no way, no how. And so that's how I started doing what I am doing now.
Yeah. And I mean, I was at your house whenever you were working at that last job, and you were just on the phone literally for hours and hours of the day. And I remember being like, I could never do this. Like, this is soul sucking.
Yeah, it was. I mean, I would work like sun up to sundown and beyond. I would be double, triple booked for calls multiple times throughout the day, back to back meetings, getting over 100 emails every day, plus Teams, plus messages, plus calls. Like it was bananas. And it was in cannabis. And because it's not federally legal in the United States, each state has different rules and regulations. And so we were what was a multi-state operator. So we were, and I think at that time, 8 different states. So in each state, you have to know the rules and the regulation for each state. They have to have their own systems. And then so you have your own vendors. There's, not anything across state lines. You have to be able to have visibility to the business. So you have to have all these systems link up to have an overarching. It was bananas. It was truly, truly bananas. And again, like I was unfulfilled. I wasn't really helping people. And yeah, I mean, I was giving everything I got and the reward just wasn't there. I mean, yeah, sure, I was living in Costa Rica, but I was glued to my seat all day, every day. And I also felt like extra responsibility that I had to stay visible and like prove my worth and prove that I was working. So I was known for the company to always have my camera on because again, like that pressure. And I feel like this is where it gets into the difference between like male and female too, because I feel like, men are just more cavalier and they don't have to like prove themselves as much. Whereas I felt like I really had to prove like, oh, even though I'm Costa Rica, like I'm really working because I was working bananas. But, ultimately that came to an end and then that helped me catapult into the whole different lifestyle that I'm living now.
Yeah. So talk to me about starting your business. Like, so you did your yoga training, and then did you do your breath work when you were in Costa Rica afterwards?
Yeah, so that's when I did it. And I think for me, this is why it took me so long to step into doing this within my career because I was scared and I didn't want to bet on myself. What if I fail? What if I'm not successful? Everything just seems really scary. And because ever since I was 14, and had my first job, I relied on the man. I had a consistent paycheck. I had that safety and security. And so to step away from that is really, really scary, especially later in life when you're living in a foreign country. It just feels like it's a lot of high stakes. And so again, an email landed in my inbox for pause. Perfect timing. I was like, yes, I'm doing the breath work. And at the end, they did the whole sales pitch and I invested in myself at a time where I didn't have a lot of finances. Let me back up. Early at the end, I got laid off in the end of January. And actually, I was in LA when I got laid off because I was on my way to Mexico the following week to close on my property that I had just bought in cash. So I had just depleted my savings and then here I got laid off. So I didn't have a lot of savings this time, but it just was the right time to finally bet on myself. And so that's when I ended up doing the breathwork certification. And then with doing that, I really started to ruminate on, okay, what do I want to do? What is this vision going to be? And then I came back to, I did some different exercises and I really came back to, again, wanting to be of service because in those other roles, I was not helping. I wasn't like part of the solution. I was really part of the problem. And so I wanted to do something that it was of service. I wanted to do something where I was not sitting behind a computer desk. And it was something that I have a passion for movement. I mean, I started dance when I was 2.5 years old, and it's been a huge part of my life. And, I had my yoga certification, and I knew the power of breath work. And so I just kind of started thinking. And so that's how I landed on Move Your Wellness. And, I think it's a clever name. When I looked it up and I just was like, how can nobody have this? And really what I think it's about is really just truly helping people feel great about themselves. And I think when you get into the health and the wellness space, that, you know, you can ask 100 different people what they think health and wellness is, and you're going to get an array of answer. And that's because wellness and health, it's subjective and dynamic, and it's constantly changing. But really what it all comes down to me, is movement. And not just movement, physical movement of the body, but movement of a collective. So it's about all the small little moves and choices you make throughout your day, that you start to make more aligned choices and whatever your goals are. And then slowly but surely, all these small little decisions start to mount up to different behaviors. And overall, you're making an impact on your overall well being and wellness and health. So, whether that is deciding to drink more water, or taking the stairs, or doing, 5 minutes of breath work, if you're choosing these types of things instead of doom scrolling, or instead of, having another cup of coffee, or instead of I'll work out tomorrow, as long as you're just really putting your best foot forward and making these small little moves, you're making overall moves towards your wellness. And then within that, for me, I have my 3 pillars. So it's move your body, your brain, and your soul. So the body is all kinds of movement. So it's yoga and it's dance primarily for right now. I have visions longer term of where I'm going to take this. And then moving your brain is the breath work and meditation, and really the tools that we have in order to regulate our nervous system. And then move your soul is just, again, overall having a collective of people within the community that can just show you new experiences. When I went down to Costa Rica, I didn't, I knew what cacao ceremonies were. I knew sound baths, different things, but until I had different experiences, or with plant medicine and different types of things, again, you don't know what you don't know. And so when I started to get exposed to these things, and then started to be like, gosh, what would be super cool would be to have a breathwork that goes into a sound bath, and then goes into a farm to table dinner, and this like whole experience. And then actually putting it together, because when you have your own business, you can, whatever your vision is, you can find aligned partners to do it. And then it was like, okay, how can I make this even bigger? And then that's when I started to lean into doing retreats in Costa Rica, and having people come and having these experiences that they really are difficult to find in your backyard. But that when you come and you have them, and you have different breathwork experiences, or doing daily yoga and meditation, or learning how to surf, or going to these whole full-on experiences, it truly shifts something in you, and it moves your soul.
Love that. From like the business perspective, I know you had all of these like senior level roles, VP. What was the difference between like starting something from scratch on your own versus like what experience you had in corporate? Was it overwhelming? Tell me a little bit about setting everything up.
Yeah, I mean, it was a lot of different things. Because you don't have someone else to answer to, you are your own mountain. And I still struggle with this every single day. And I have a million things, a million ideas, but it's like, okay, what am I going to tackle? And so really kind of sitting down and saying, okay, what do I need to do first? When you are running your own business, and especially when you're starting out, you're wearing all the hats. And I think, a lot of people don't talk about this. And so for me, it was like, I didn't know how to set up a website. And that was probably one of my biggest pitfalls in the beginning. Was I felt like I had to have some sort of online presence. And so I did my research, and I landed on WordPress. Worst decision ever. And then I felt pigeonholed into it. So I struggled with trying to build my website. And for a year, I just couldn't do it. So finally I shifted platforms, and, I put my nose to the grindstone. But I think just having my own accountability was really, really challenging. And I also got so much into the comparison space. And I think it was Theodore Roosevelt that said, like, comparison is the thief of joy. And so I was comparing myself to other people and the credentials that they had in this space. And who am I to be, shifting careers and trying to go into this wellness space? And then, the imposter syndrome really crept in. And so these were some things that I was experiencing for the first time, and they're still very prevalent, but now I just have different tools to kind of deal with it. And I know when I'm, getting in this space where I'm comparing myself or getting in my own way and just trying to redirect myself, because it's up to me. There's the saying that whether you think you can or you think you can't, either way you're right.
Yeah, you have to have like the most delusional confidence when you're a business owner because it will take you through the ringer.
Yeah.
So, what are some of the tools you use? Because I always get stuck in it as well. So, I'm sure everyone listening is also in the same boat. So, if you have any tools that you'd like to share, I know breathwork is probably a big one.
Yes, it is. Yeah, I like to say I get lost in the sauce sometimes. So, yeah, whenever I'm having any kind of trouble focusing, anything where I may be stuck, and something else is like when something is not in flow, then it's usually like stop trying to go down that path. It's a redirection. It's not a no, it's just a redirection. So we don't have all the answers. And sometimes the answer is so glaring and so right in front of you, but I always say you can't see the forest through the trees. Like you're so focused and narrow-minded that you need to be kind of like extrapolated out to see the bigger picture or to see another way. So I can't tell you how many times that I have gone into a breathwork practice and literally like the downloads of the plan or a whole different thing come and I come out and like, okay, that's it. Boom, start going to work. And I think also there is some like neuroplasticity with rewiring. So when you start to find yourself going down, they're called automatic negative thoughts or ants. I love that acronym because the ants can just start to like take over in your brain. And so when you start to find yourself in a situation where you're procrastinating or negative self-talk, those types of things, just trying to catch yourself so you recognize the pattern that you're doing or what's happening, and you don't shame yourself, you don't give yourself any guilt that you're doing these things, but instead start to do something to reprogram. So I think with a lot of things is if you just start something, then you're going to continue doing it. So they always say, like with exercise, if you don't feel like exercising, just start for 5 minutes, and more often than not, you're going to continue. So I think same thing with all the different tasks that I have at hand. Sometimes I can just get so stuck in maybe like a creative, what I want to call an event or making a flyer. But then I kind of redirect that and give it some time and some space, and also just try to be a little softer on myself. I think that's another thing, is that we're our own worst critics. And I also am a type A. I'm an Aries like you, so I strive for perfection. And you just need to start working on something and put it out there, and you can refine it as you go on. But I think just, starting to do something is the number one thing.
Yeah, I've learned. I also progress over perfection wins every time, just taking those small steps. Even this podcast, I thought about way back when I visited you in LA 3 years ago. And finally, now I'm doing it. But I also think I needed some things to like kind of fall in place into my journey to bring me here. So I always know as well, sometimes it's divine timing that maybe the project wasn't quite ready, wasn't quite cooked yet to bring to life. So
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I think it's so important to just like be leaning on yourself. Like there's always tomorrow. Sometimes things are going to take a little longer than you planned, and that's okay. And
Mm-hmm.
when you're your own boss, you can let that happen.
Mm-hmm.
So you talked about community, and I know like you probably had a little bit of community because your boyfriend already, was living there. How important was that in kind of starting and growing your business?
Well, I think it's a little different because in Costa Rica, the barrier to entry was much less than the US. I found that had I been in the US and I wanted to go and start teaching yoga, because I got my certification, but I never used it. So I didn't even know like my style of teaching or my voice, and I was a little out of practice on my own. And the breath work was still something new, and I was going into the practicum, which really helped me kind of find how I wanted to lead breath work and be in that space. And so in the US though, I feel it's more like, okay, like who do you know? What can you do? It's, how many followers you have? Like, what can you do for me? Yeah. And so in Costa Rica, I literally went to my friend that owned a hotel there. It's a beautiful hotel. It's where I host my retreats. And I said, yeah, Elle, you don't have anyone teaching yoga here. Would you be interested in that? She's like, yeah, let's talk. So we had coffee like a couple days later. And then that following Monday, I started teaching yoga. So I also think that in a space, I've had a lot of amazing women on my journey. And so I think that's a great example of a woman that really saw some potential and saw my desires for wanting something different and really supported me in taking that risk. But also I took all of my skills from my corporate world into that space. So I was never ever late for showing up to class. I always came prepared, always professional. And so it was a two-way street. I wasn't, there were some reputations in Costa Rica of people having a little bit too much of that pura vida. And so, oh, I don't like so-and-so's class because they always cancel last minute. Whereas I was someone really reliable and professional and took my craft because I really wanted this. I really wanted to give this a fair shake. And so I was showing up like extra, extra hard. But I think because down in Costa Rica, there is a whole different mindset. It was post-COVID. So there was a lot of people that came down that had aligned ways of thinking, wanting and desiring a different way of life for themselves and or their families. And so there was such a focus on different communities coming together and really supporting and helping one another. So I was part of a women's group that we would go to dinner every week. But even that, like, I'm a pretty outgoing woman, going there, and I only knew he's my ex now, but I only knew my boyfriend at the time. And I didn't really connect with his friends in his circle. And I was also in that super stressful job. And so I just wanted so badly to go and have coffee with a girlfriend. And I didn't have that. So I struggled until I really put myself out there with the women's group. And then that's when everything kind of shifted for me. And then just starting to get more dialed in to go to different activities and, whether it was free stuff like joining surfing groups or going surfing with friends or going to dinners or there is something going on all the time. I got really immersed into the salsa community. And so down there, because life is really challenging, there is a huge sense of community. So I eventually, when I landed in the community space, it was really, really supportive.
Yeah, a community is so important no matter
Mhm.
where you are. And sometimes it just takes that little getting out of your comfort zone a little bit to email someone or just show up by yourself to an event and just,
Yeah.
introduce yourself. Because,
Yeah.
like, I mean, as solo travelers, both of us have been in a situation where we just have to, like, go for it because we don't have anyone else. So if you want to hang
Mhm.
out with someone, you got to just go say hi.
Yeah.
It's, you kind of learn that skill the more you're on your own as well, I think. So
Mhm.
with that, you ended up in a new place, you're starting a new business. What kind of advice would you give someone else that is going to fall into a similar path?
I think just, trust yourself and just take the risk. There's another expression and I stole it from Sex and the City and shoulding on ourselves. So, like stopping the should, like, oh, I should have done this sooner or I should have done it this way. At the end of the day, you will land where you're going to land. And I'm a firm believer in our paths can take us all different ways, but even just one choice can take you in a different direction. But ultimately, whether it's the right or the wrong choice, it's going to eventually bring you back to the path that you're aligned on. So I'm a firm believer that everything happens for us and everything is like orchestrating. And so if I look back on my life, it is all like puzzle pieces and I can just map them all together. And, some of the craziest things, I'm like, gosh, that like, why did that have to happen? Or when you're going through it, you get into this maybe victim mentality, but then you start to see the full picture coming together. So I think just really trusting in yourself and going for it and taking the risk. And you don't know until you you know?
Now you have transitioned back to Detroit. What were you kind of feeling in Costa Rica that like maybe pulled you back home or that you needed a big change?
It was a culmination of things. So life there was pretty challenging. And, there is a big wellness community, but it was very, very saturated and it just had continued to get more and more saturated. And, there's really only 6 months out of the year where you can have a thriving business and everyone's trying to cram as much business in as possible because the other 6 months are the rainy season. So tourism is low and there's not as many opportunities to make money. And I also had a lot of relationship shifts and I just realized that Costa Rica was not serving me and I really felt like I was having a lot of distractions. I mean, yeah, the tropical lifestyle is amazing, but there was always something that could kind of pull me from doing my business. And also the house that I was living in, I never felt inspired or comfortable to work there. And I just felt like I was getting in my own way of really moving myself forward. And I have a bigger vision, which I'm exercising, keeping things close to my chest until they're more concrete. But I have a bigger vision, and that vision just doesn't work or align in Costa Rica. So coming back here to the US and recalibrating my life and recalibrating some things within my business in order to prepare myself for this next level, this next step within my business.
Yeah, I think if anyone learns anything from you, it's that you just know how to bounce back and like redirect and make the best out of whatever situation comes about. And I think a lot of people can relate to being laid off. I mean, I've had friends who've been laid off like 4 times since I met them in the last couple of years. It's hard out there, and to have, something
Mhm.
that you're truly passionate about to start, whether no matter how scary it is, it pays off because you actually enjoy what you're doing versus, like you said, your whole body was like rejecting the idea of,
Mhm.
going back to corporate and putting your resume out there and rewriting it.
Yeah.
So that's exciting for your next chapter. I know this is going to air after, but you're doing a couple free breathwork classes, which is exciting. Do you plan to do that in the future?
Yeah. So the thing about breath work is, I mean, it is so powerful I know you've done sessions before, but we did one last week. And, the thing is like most people still don't know what breath work is. And I didn't either until what was it like, 6, 7 years ago. Um, and now we're living in such a cool time where science is starting to kind of prove what our ancestors knew. And so this is not some like new technology that we do within breathwork, but there's so much more science behind it. And so now people are realizing that it's not just some like woo woo tool, and that there is actual things happening within our body that are for our highest good and can be very, very healing. It can be just as simple as having some relief or reconnecting with yourself, which sounds like a little woo woo, but I mean, how many times do people really sit down and just drop into their body and check in and feel like, how does this feel in my body? And start to do a body scan. And it's crazy when you just allow yourself to come into stillness, the things that you can realize within yourself, the things that are not in alignment, the things that are really heavy or holding you back. And so breathwork is a beautiful tool in order to kind of check in with your body, see how you're doing. I call it self-study and get curious about what's happening. So really, I just want to be able to share this with so many people because from my first breathwork blew my mind. And I just want to shout it from the rooftops. So I am doing some free breath work and I will continue to do so. I again have greater vision for where I want to take this in the future. And so, but I do envision in the future, every once in a while offering some free services, again, just for people to experience the powerful tool that we all have that lives within us.
Yeah, I mean, I was going through some grief last week when I did it, and I swear, like, 20 pounds were lost in tension. So I highly recommend it. And I'll definitely have all of her links in the show notes so you can follow her and try one of her sessions for free whenever they come around again. So, looking back on your journey, is there like something you're most proud of or a few things that you can look back and say, like, wow, that was like awesome?
So that I can pinpoint just one. I look back and just the different things that I've done. I think at the end of the day, I'm a calculated risk taker. I subscribe to this idea of don't ask, don't get. And so that has landed me in a lot of amazing opportunities, from getting promotions to just different opportunities, because we make up stories we love to make up stories. We make up stories in our head. We think we know someone. We think we know what their response is going to be. Oh, I'm not going to ask them because they might XYZ. And more often than not, we're not mind readers, but more often than not, when you put yourself out and you ask for help or ask for what you desire, rarely will you get a no. Usually you will get a, that's interesting, or, oh, I hadn't considered that, or let's talk about it, or a yes. And so when it is a no, it's just a redirection. There's a lot of talk about rejection. And so I just think, like, being a calculated risk taker, putting yourself out there, not being afraid to ask, and you just never know what the response is going to be. And it could be a response that will completely change your trajectory of your life.
Yeah, I know that's definitely something I struggle with as well. But as they say, closed mouths don't get fed. So you got to ask. And that's one thing I loved about you when I met you and was traveling. Like, you were so assertive. You didn't care. You asked the questions. You asked for whatever you wanted, whether you knew the language or not. You were like, I'm just gonna go for it. And so that's a trait that I really admire about you.
Love it or hate it. I think that's an Aries trait too. I mean, just known for being so direct. And yeah, at the end of the day too, is like, I know I'm not for everyone, and nor should I be. And you really have to be okay with criticism, and just knowing that the right people are always going to fall into your path, whether it be clients or potential business partners. And so just, staying true to yourself, staying true to your vision. And yeah, I think that's another big one.
Okay, so this is the big one. So we started kind of asking you what you envisioned for your life, but now that you're kind of out of corporate and not living the quote unquote American dream, as we say, what does success look like for you now? How do you redefine it?
Hmm. I think because for so long I was waking up, and before I even woke up, when I went to bed the night before, having, anxiety, and then waking up and just like, just not having that spark and that motivation. I think success for me is just doing things that truly light me up and bring me happiness. And you can't put a price on happiness. And I'll never forget, at one of my jobs, when I had just come back from travel, there's Shauna Core with the Happiness Advantage. He has a book and did a TED Talk. And I literally did a presentation to my peers about finding your happiness, because I wasn't happy and it was evident. And I was really just lost. And that was really at the same time where I started to do travel and just realize that you can't put a price on your happiness. And ultimately, that's a choice. We have a choice every day, how we wake up and what we put into our lives, and we can do and be anything that we want and desire in life. And it's just up to us in order to take the aligned action to execute it.
1000%. And I mean, your mood affects every part of your body, and it's so important. Like this morning, my success was that my alarm went off at 8. I had a hard time falling asleep last night. I hit the snooze till 9. I was like, man, what a luxury that is. Because like I didn't have anything on my schedule. I don't have kids. I don't have a husband. So I was like, that was success to me this morning.
Yeah, slow mornings are really nice. I mean, everyone that's in more of like that corporate grind, they're always waiting for the weekend. And because they're just allowed to be able to go to brunch and go for a hike or whatever their jam is. And so to be able to have, if that's what you desire in life and is that what brings you happiness, then you can design your life to have slow mornings if that's something that is high on your list. So yeah, we are the architects of our lives for sure.
Yeah, I love that. So I'm going to put all of Kirstyn's links below. Do you want to do a little commercial about what you have going on as far as packages and retreats, whatever fun is coming up for you?
Yeah. If you want to work one on one with me, I'm going to be doing some discounts for your listeners. So that'll be within your show notes. And then also, I do the Costa Rica retreats. So next year, I'm going to be doing it in July. I'm still working on some fine details. So maybe by the time this is out, we'll have the dates confirmed. But it's a beautiful retreat and it's called Move Your Soul, and the cornerstones are yoga and breathwork. However, it's not all woo woo. We go an afternoon on a boat, and we're doing really amazing, one of a kind, world class experiences. So for any of your listeners, for the early bird pricing, I'd be offering $200 off on that.
Amazing. I love it. Thank you so much for sharing your journey. There's a lot of good nuggets in here. I hope it was really inspiring for our listeners, and I'm so excited to see your next chapter unfold.
Thank you so much. It was a pleasure to be here.
Thank you for tuning in to this week's episode of Founded with Soul. I'm so excited for our guest next week, so be sure to tune in for that one. If you want any more details on Kirstyn's services and her website, they're all linked down below in the show notes. If you're looking for some marketing help for your health and wellness business, I'm your girl. There's more information on my services below. And I'm looking forward to launching a community of other people in the same spot, either looking to leave corporate, aspiring health and wellness practitioners, or maybe you have a side hustle and you want to take it full time. I'm going to be creating a community where we bring everyone together for networking, accountability, and business strategy. So be sure to look out for that. And I can't wait to see you on next week's episode. Thanks. Have a great one.